On this episode of the Brisbane Property Podcast, we'll talk about the difference between local-based buyers agents and borderless buyers agents.
We're going to be discussing pros and cons of different types of services that do exist in the market so that you, as a buyer, can make an informed decision about what's going to be right for you. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Brisbane Property Podcast with your hosts Melinda and Scott Jennison.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Brisbane Property Podcast. Today, Melinda and I are talking about the difference between local-based buyers agents and borderless buyers agents.
Yes, thanks for joining us once again. And of course, in this episode today, we are tackling an issue as the buyer's agent industry continues to grow nationwide. We're seeing more and more entrants purchasing across multiple jurisdictions, that is multiple different states. And we compare those buyer's agents to buyer's agents that operate more locally, giving people more of a local perspective. Because I think as the industry continues to evolve, it's important just to address some of the pros and cons of different approaches so that consumers are aware. And of course, part of the intent behind this episode is is because I do hold the role of president of the Real Estate Buyers Agents Association of Australia, and I'm sure most of our listeners would already know that. And because of that, I'm a very strong industry advocate for ensuring that we follow best practice in terms of the buyers agent industry. So we're really going to take a deep dive today to give anyone out there that's trying to decide whether to use a buyer's agent or not, an understanding of the differences that do exist in the industry.
And not just use a buyer's agent, but also who to choose. As Melinda's mentioned, there's a lot of buyer's agents out there that you can actually choose from, and it has to be the right match for each person, and you'll find your own match if you talk to enough people. But yeah, do your research, make sure you, and I've talked about this before in other podcasts, do your research, make sure you have a look at who's who, what their qualifications are, whether it's through REBA, whether it's through PIPA, the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, qualifications. I mean, as everyone knows, I'm a licensed builder, so we look at qualifications in certain areas, whether it's those types of things for qualifications or local knowledge as well. Now, this is where it comes down to the local buyers agents or borderless. If somebody asked me, for example, go and buy a property in Perth or in Melbourne, Sydney, wherever it is, I really don't know those areas in depth to be able to give recommendations on, especially for home buyers, things like school catchments or coffee shops or lifestyle in those areas. I don't really know.
Absolutely.
Compared to what we know up here in Brisbane. And we know all those little ins and outs and those little things to help people as well. So big difference between local buyers agents and borderless.
That's right. And one thing that I will point out for most people that already operate in the industry, or for those that may not already be aware, the real estate industry is legislated on state-based legislation. So what that means is the rules around engaging a selling agent or a buyer's agent, or the rules around how they must operate here in Queensland may be slightly different to the operations in New South Wales and different again in Victoria and so on and so forth. So therefore, what we have seen more and more, especially over the last 5 years, is a number of buyer's agents that are operating across multiple jurisdictions, but perhaps not fully understanding the state-based legislation that exists within each state that they're operating in. Now, of course, it's essential for any buyer's agent to be licensed in every state that they're operating within. And we're going to talk a lot more about what does it mean to be licensed and what sort of roles within the buyer's advocacy space is a license required for, because we are seeing in some instances buyer's agents that potentially are located interstate but buying here in Queensland that are outsourcing various parts of the role to different parties who may or may not hold the required license. So the purpose of this episode is to help you understand the questions you must ask if you are selecting a buyer's agent so you can ensure you are working with a reputable provider.
So when we talk local buyers agents, as I touched on, obviously specific markets, they've got a deep knowledge, obviously, of the neighbourhoods, the streets, the demographics, council plans, catchments, school catchments, infrastructure, those types of things, and obviously a good agent relationship. Okay, you can't. To me, I don't think you can be a specialist everywhere, but I think you can be a specialist in your niche market in those areas. So you'll have good days. Local agents will have good relationships with certain sales agents.
Yeah, agree. A locally based buyer's agent provides a level of local knowledge that data alone will not provide.
Yep.
And you've touched on some certainly some good points there. Obviously, when we work in a local patch as buyer's agents here in Brisbane, we know and understand not just at a suburb level what might be appealing in terms of suburb movements. Property investment opportunities, the way people like to live, the demographic group, etc. Data tells us a lot about a location, but local knowledge tells us the perception of a neighbourhood, what people think about living to the east of this particular road or living to the west, what areas are more desirable than others, which areas might have the neighbourhoods that are, I guess, more problematic and which areas are the safer neighbourhoods. These are things that local knowledge tells you because you've worked in a particular patch for a very long period of time. And a lot of it doesn't just come from being a buyer's advocate. A lot of it comes from living in an area for an extended period of time as well. So, for example, put me in Sydney, I'm lost. I've spent many visits. I've been to Sydney many times. I've been to Melbourne many times. And recently, Scott, you and I were in Perth for a couple of weeks. We really immersed ourselves in some of these other capital city markets. But if someone asked me to purchase a good investment or a home for them in one of these other markets, I simply wouldn't have the local knowledge to be able to advise them to the best of my ability. And that's why we prefer to work locally, act locally, and represent people locally, because not only do we have access to the data, but we also have that local knowledge to be able to share with people about the nuances of different neighbourhoods.
I think when you go to a suburb, sometimes you can, and this is just a rough sort of number, but you can sometimes break it up into 4 pockets as well. So there's different pockets within suburbs. You can go, well, that pocket is like this, and this pocket, well, it's slightly different. But you can break areas up. Again, that's the local knowledge that we're talking about. When we look at borderless agents, obviously they tend to operate either nationwide or in more than one local market. Really heavy on data as well.
Yep.
So obviously when they're looking at that, they're relying on tech tools and things like that to match the client brief. Less of a personal experience, and obviously no physical presence for that local knowledge as well for their buyer.
And of course, they're probably the negatives. We can't underestimate why people would choose a borderless buyer's agent, because they do it does suggest that they're not aligned with any particular market, so they don't have a vested interest in any particular location. But let me tell you that we are seeing a new age in terms of what's happening with borderless buyers agents, and some agencies that have a high volume of clients come through have the ability to potentially move a market. Now, what do I mean by that? We've already seen what's happened in some segments of the market. There are some companies now that provide intel and information to buyers agency businesses based on data in terms of where the next hot spot is located. And a lot of the large buyers agents that have a really high volume of clients coming through their books will all be buying into the same market. What happens is demand almost artificially increases, and we see a lot of buyer activity and sales activity occurring in a particular market, and that has the effect of shifting a market. So a buyer's agency might be buying in a particular market for 12 or 18 months. They stop buying in that market. If the demand falls away enough, you're going to see a leveling out of that capital growth. In fact, if you start to see people needing to sell, you potentially can see downward pressure on prices. And I'd like to just share a story with you. So we quite often talk to people who have had a not so good experience trusting advice of others in the past. And I had a conversation just recently with a prospective client who's built a portfolio over a number of years. And unfortunately for this particular individual, they have purchased a number of properties that are now in a negative equity position. They originally had purchased on not only the promise of growth, but also the promise of strong yields. But even the yields on these properties have fallen away dramatically over the years of ownership. And this is a significant problem that a lot of people don't talk about. In the past, we've heard about the risks associated with mining towns, for example. There's people that are still suffering the consequences of purchasing, poor quality assets in areas that have relied on a single industry, such as a mining town. And we know that the negative equity position in a lot of those properties has hurt a lot of people. But it's not just the negative equity position, it's the fact that there's downward pressure on rents as well. And what that means is even the cash flow position is stretched on many of these properties. So these are not the sorts of situations that we want to find ourselves in. And with the volume of buyer's agents shifting markets at the moment, time will tell whether we start to see something different in some of the markets that they simply stop buying in. If the demand shifts downward, sufficiently so, we may see some of those homes falling into negative equity as well. Now, of course, we're in different economic times. We may be looking at areas that have a number of industries, so that may not happen. But these are some of the real risks associated with a large volume of buyers moving into and out of small markets around the country. We can find growth happens very quickly over a short period of time, and then it stagnates very rapidly. The issue is if it falls, then we might find some investors in negative equity. Of course, some of the buyer's agents that are shifting these markets are pulling equity out of properties for clients to be positioning them in the next hotspot before they find that negative equity carrying through. So these are some of the risks associated with following big market shifts and big market trends instead of relying on long-term fundamentals associated with long-term supply and demand drivers.
I think the biggest thing here is avoiding making mistakes.
Absolutely.
We talk about a lot of money investing into property. It just hurts when we see people make mistakes, and it's not doing what it's supposed to do. It's a great vehicle for helping and creating that wealth in life. And I think when it's done right, everyone benefits from it. When it's not done right, unfortunately, we hear those stories from others, and it does sadden us to hear those types of things. When we're looking buyers agents, as a few things we've touched on, obviously, is real-time market insights, street level knowledge, which data can't show. So when we talk about things like for Brisbane, flight paths, flood zones, neighbourhood dynamics, all those types of things, they're not things that you can actually pick up on the data side of things. Relationships with agents, I mean, that is really critical because you get a lot of pre-markets and also off-market opportunities, properties that don't come to the market at all. And obviously the physical inspection side of things, to be able to physically go there and have a look at the property and walk through and make sure that it is the right type of property for the client as well.
If I may just circle back on something you said there, you said, we can't sort of have a look at flight paths and flood zones online. Well, actually, that's something that we can assess online. However, it's so important to overlay the local knowledge of what that means by visiting a particular site. So, for example, with flight paths in Brisbane, there's so many different flight paths being proposed and trialled at the moment that you can't actually rely on, what's published online because it's changing quite rapidly as they investigate what are going to be the more permanent routes that planes are taking. And of course, there's no lanes in the sky. So even though you might be near a flight path, understanding the impact through a site assessment can really make or break the decision for some buyers. And we have had some buyers that, even though there's no noise overlay as such in a particular area that is associated or close to a flight path, the noise that the aeroplanes have actually emitted have been a deal breaker for clients once they are there physically on the site listening to that overhead noise. It's not something that's going to get picked up by an on-screen assessment. Flood zones, we can definitely look at flood zoning and get an understanding through flood awareness maps and council overlays and even floodwise property reports to get an understanding of what previous risk has occurred. But there's nothing better than relying on, what happened in the last flood in Brisbane? Where did the water levels come to? And again, a lot of local knowledge will enable us to obtain more information than what mapping will provide for us as well. So they're the sorts of things that local knowledge, can share with potential buyers.
The one I did touch on earlier as well, selling agent relationships, getting off markets, pre-markets, those types of things. Also, when it comes to negotiation, I mean, those types of things, having that local knowledge and that agent report, that is really, really important. And that is something that the clients benefit from when you start to talk to agents that actually know you. They've seen you, they've spoken to you, and they know how you operate. That's something that the advantage that their clients get from having, I think, a local agent that works with other sales agents as well.
And of course, I know on weekends we quite often get SMS messages from some of the local agents in the area. They don't like turning up to auctions of other agents, but they're very happy to reach out to us to find out the results of some of the local auctions in the area, knowing that our team may have visited that particular property and obtained the result, which of course we're willing to share with anyone that reaches out, simply because that's market intel and it helps both selling agents, buyers agents, and sellers and buyers themselves better understand the market. So, being local on the ground, understanding what's transacting today, how many people are turning up at open homes, how many people are registering for auctions, how many people are actively bidding at auctions, watching all of that happen as it unfolds in real time provides much more accurate property pricing in a market where there may be more buyers than sellers. And then, of course, that's going to enable you to, be better represented, simply because you're getting data that's in real time, not waiting for something to become a settled sale, which is often 30 to 60 days later. Well, that's the case in Queensland. In some other jurisdictions or other states, that settlement time frame, or the time frame between when a contract might be entered into and when the property settles and that settled sales data becomes available on the major platforms, it can be a matter of months. So having that real-time information, especially if the market's moving upward or downward, can make a big difference in how you would be advising your clients.
Another one quickly on that one is auctions. And this is something we talked to some people about as well, is going to auctions and seeing if a property passes in, what was the highest bid? And we've seen this before where you might, let's say, I'll just do some round numbers. It's sitting at 1.5 million and the bids have paused and are negotiating and they're struggling, and they might come back out and the agent might say, look, we're putting a vendor's bid in at 1.8 mil. And the property passes in. Now, everyone thinks that property passed in at 1.8 mil. So then negotiations start at that level, whereas what we actually know is the highest bid was around 1.5. So that's the sort of knowledge we're talking about. We're getting out and about, going to auctions and understanding what's happening real time. And that's not something that somebody borderless can actually do as well.
That's right. And I guess, whilst I've outlined some of the pros and the reasons why people would choose a borderless buyer's agent, because they do have a national lens and they're able to look at multiple markets all at once. There are some risks associated with attaching to that model or choosing a buyer's agent that is going to represent you under that model. And the first of those is that there is a heavy reliance, of course, on remote data matching. So you are relying on data which is quite often retrospective, and that could cause someone to miss some of the critical local factors that can influence a market and the way buyers ordinarily would react in that particular market. So obviously, being aware of that as a risk is important if you are choosing a borderless buyer's agent. You should be asking if there's a physical inspection that's being undertaken by someone in their team. Now, here in Queensland, if someone is inspecting a property on behalf of another buyer and you're being paid to do so, that person must hold either a registration certificate or a license to conduct that physical inspection. So there is a license class required. A buyer's agency that may operate out of other states will require a licensed operator on the ground to conduct that inspection for them. We know that some of the borderless buyer's agents will rely on others in the industry to complete that inspection for them. Some would rely on the selling agent to potentially send through a video, or some others may actually engage the services of a local property manager who will inspect that property for them on the basis that they'll actually obtain the ongoing property management if that client purchases the property. So if you're comfortable with that, you just need to be aware that that is the way that some of the buyer's agents may operate. And it's important to ask so that you are aware up front as to who's doing the additional due diligence And also, if there's something that's later found to be problematic with the property, who's actually liable for, where does that liability shift? Does it sit with the buyer's agent that you engaged or with the person that has inspected the property? And these are the questions to ask up front before you engage.
Obviously, the legal side of things, different contracts, as you mentioned earlier on, different states have different regulations, different contractual side of things. So the legal risk, local regulations, those types of things, they're going to be different everywhere. So that's something people really have to be aware of.
And look, it's absolutely a lot of work keeping up with legislation changes. I mean, here in Queensland, for example, our latest rental reforms have just come into effect. It's critical that we as local buyers agents are aware of what they are so we can educate our clients when they're purchasing investment properties so that they're also aware of any additional obligations that come with being a landlord. Obviously, with every state, I know New South Wales are introducing new tenancy legislation within the next month as well. So keeping up with new legislative changes across multiple jurisdictions can be more challenging. And of course, when we're assessing state government planning schemes, local government planning schemes, and overlaying all of that to understand where there's future supply pockets coming and where there's not, having that level of detail across every single jurisdiction is going to be, it's going to be a lot. So ensuring that your buyer's agent is keeping you updated on all of that information as well becomes really important, and that's going to depend on the size of the team that's representing you.
I think when you look at the local representation for buyers, particularly for investors, looking at the long-term performance, so your rental yields, your capital growth, the local experts in those certain areas, and obviously the future upside. So before the data sort of catches up to it, the upside of things, infrastructure, there's so many things involved to know the local markets as well.
Yeah, so for property investors, as you pointed out there, we can see when investor demand starts to increase based on the offers that are coming in and the input that selling agents are telling us based on the ratio of owner occupiers to investors. We also know when rental incomes are likely to increase. That's when more tenants are turning up to inspect rental properties that are available for rent. We can obviously look at vacancy rate data, but that doesn't give us an indication of demand, which is how many people are turning up to rent a property. On the sales side, of course, how many people are turning up to inspect a property? How busy are the open homes? These are real-time indicators of demand that you can only get by having what we would call boots on the ground, being out every Saturday and understanding the market in real time. And that obviously helps to determine the direction of a market. If you're turning up and there's no other buyer interest, obviously that is low demand. Whereas if you're turning up and lining up and getting into the property 15 minutes later because you spent 15 minutes in a lineup, that is a different level of demand, and that's likely to cause or shift a market based on the supply and demand imbalance in that market.
Your emotional buyers or your owner occupiers, obviously the benefit there is the guidance of lifestyle, schools and school catchments, commuting, so transport or future plan transport corridors, the community itself and its feel, and even things like renovations. Can you do renovations, and what's the potential if that's something in a certain location that you find that's right, but you want to do some upgrading or some renovations to those properties as well. So they're the sort of things, obviously, that, being local, again, is really critical for those.
And obviously it just provides a more holistic due diligence process for clients as a whole, because you're going to get more local rundown, as you're going to get the summary of the data. Of course, all buyers agents have access to the same data, but on layering that up with local knowledge on certain precincts, certain locations, how local buyers perceive certain property types or certain locations within a suburb, that's beyond anything you're going to find on a spreadsheet or anything that you're going to find in any program or software piece that's provided. So I think that's important for you to understand if you are selecting a buyer's agent, to really get an understanding of what information are they relying upon. Is it all done by desktop, or are they actually out and about understanding what's happening in real time on the ground as they represent to you?
Now, when people are looking for a buyer's agent, as we've touched on so many times, the qualifications and what's involved in it, some consumers they presume that all buyer's agents are the same, same qualifications, same licensing, same level, but they're just not.
No, and look, I think that there's been enough, awareness in the past raised about some issues that exist within our industry, and we're not proud of that. Certainly those of us that operate at the highest ethical standard want to ensure that as an industry we maintain a minimum standard, and that's one of the reasons why REBA, the Real Estate Buyers Agents Association of Australia, exists, and our members do have to meet minimum qualifications to qualify for membership, so consumers can feel more assured that if they are working with a REBA accredited buyer's agent, that they're working with a reputable provider that does meet minimum standards and does operate by a professional ethical code of conduct. But there's been national media scrutiny in the past. For example, a couple of years ago, there was a program on the ABC Four Corners that exposed some really unethical practices in buyer representation. If you haven't seen that program and you are looking to use a buyer's agent, I would highly recommend that you use Google and have a look at some of the past programs on Four Corners, because you'll get an understanding of some of the unscrupulous activities that unfortunately exist in our industry. It's important that you're aware that sometimes not every operator is ethical, and it's important to align yourself with a business that has high values and integrity and is acting in your best interest and not in their own best interest.
Few questions to ask, and this is something like I think people need to. It's a fantastic service when it's done right, and I think it can really, really help people to buy that correct property or for their home or for an investment side of things. I think initially is your qualifications, licensing qualifications, skills. What is your team made of? How do you operate? Things like that. There's lots of questions. Do you physically operate? In this market
that you're buying into. Do you actually physically operate in it? Mm-hmm. How many properties have you personally purchased in this market? And that's not personally for yourself, but for clients so that you know that there's a track record in that particular market. Do you or someone in your team attend the property inspections yourself? And if not, who does?
Yep.
Who actually represents you to help us as clients understand the property? And how do we see that? Is it a couple of photos that are sent, or do we get a full video walk through? They're the sorts of questions to ask.
I mean, on that one as well, a little bit further on, if you secure it, do you attend the building and pest inspections?
Absolutely.
Little things like that, they are so critical, because you're paying for a building and pest inspection. There should be someone there with the inspector actually going through it with them, so you can understand if something does come up or if there's little things that you can fix or whatever it may be. Do you have relationships with the local agent? What's your relationship with the agents like in those local areas?
And if you are working with a borderless buyer's agent, how do you maintain relationships if you have relationships all across Australia? Because I know as a team here in Brisbane, we have a number of agent relationships, but there's more than 500 selling agents just in Brisbane alone. And, we don't have a great relationship with 500 agents. We've got a great relationship with the main selling agents across the city. But, for someone to suggest that they've got great relationships across all of Australia, I'd be questioning that and digging a little bit further so that you can get an understanding of what does that actually look like. How do you price properties? I think, as a buyer's representative, you need to be able to accurately appraise properties. Now, for a consumer, I'd want to know that a buyer's advocate is not just relying on an automatic valuation report. That would be something that's produced from a program and based on mathematical algorithms. I would want to have local input overlaid with recent comparable sales, so that you're getting a report that's been not only completed to help you understand value, but considers all of the local implications of that particular property. So, for example, when we're pricing a property, we're looking at the most recent comparable sales. We're applying any change to market conditions that has occurred since the most recent sale. We're comparing recent sales with the property that we're considering in terms of is there a reason that might have sold especially higher or even lower than the home we're looking at because is it flood impacted? Is the zoning similar? Is it the same pocket of the neighbourhood? Is the land size larger or smaller? Is the property size itself larger or smaller? And assessing so many different angles of a property to come to a determination of value is really important. So what you don't want to be receiving is a report that's been produced or computer generated that lacks that additional detail that a human or a strong advocate buyer's agent would be looking at for you.
I know I touched on the building and pests, but I mean, do they go to the pre-settlement inspection? And what happens post-contract? So is there post-sale service? Is that sort of support always there? We assist clients with maintenance issues. If we've got a client that's interstate, for example, that a bit unsure, obviously they've got a property manager, but if they're a bit unsure, more than happy to answer those questions and help out. Talk to the property manager for them, make sure everything's getting done right and taking care of that. So that post-sale service, I think, is something really important.
Yeah, so I think that, just with some final thoughts and takeaways, I think it's important for all property buyers to understand if you are choosing a buyer's agent, not all buyer's agents are the same. And, in our experience, local experience makes a huge difference because it's going to set your understanding of that local market apart from others who may be operating purely on data. So I believe data is very helpful. Scott often talks about the fact that I'm a bit of a data nerd. We study data. Absolutely. It's so important that we get a detailed understanding of what is happening here in Brisbane because that we can use that to educate clients. However, we have to combine that with local knowledge. That's the irreplaceable bit because data alone tells part of the story, but it is that additional local knowledge that tells or fills in all of the pieces of the puzzle to really capture the full story.
Yeah, I think it's a combination, as you just touched on. So you could look at us and say, you've got the data, I've got the building knowledge, but they're the sort of things, if you don't have that local buyer's agent, you might have the data, but you're buying a physical property. So to actually physically look at it, understand what it is, what it's like, what's good about it, if there's anything bad about it, is that a deal breaker, those sort of things, can you fix it? Or is it going to cost you a lot of money down the track as well? So combining the both, I think, is critical.
And sadly, I've spoken to buyers who have worked with buyers agents who may not have been ethical operators. And I've heard the heartbreak. I've heard the terrible horror stories that have occurred where buyers agents haven't inspected properties. A buyer reached out to share their story after they'd purchased with me about a property that they'd purchased in regional New South Wales, and they engaged a local property manager after the buyer's agent had secured the property for them, and they found out that there was more than $12,000 worth of repair works and rectification works that they needed to spend on the property before it was even rentable, before it could comply with what was considered a rentable property in that jurisdiction. Now, for those buyers, obviously that's a huge amount of money to spend. They were able to come to an agreement with that particular agency that they worked with, and they paid them back their buyer's advocacy fee, but they are left with an asset that's cost them a lot of money to be rent ready. And this is exactly what we're trying to avoid: buyers getting burned by getting really poor advice and being, I guess, directed towards properties that are not actually appropriate based on their circumstances. So these are the reasons why we strongly encourage people to ask a lot of questions, talk to previous clients if you must, but really make sure you're working with a reputable provider.
Look, I think we don't want to be negative about it, obviously, but look, I think there's different services for different people. But the local knowledge, I think, is critical. As I've said before, property can be a fantastic vehicle to build wealth and to get ahead in life. Do the right thing, get the right help, talk to people, talk to multiple people, and make sure you're getting the qualifications, the knowledge, and all those types of things. Don't just rely on advertising, marketing and advertising and social media. Because I think that could sell anything. You could sell your grandmother, really. But just do your homework and make sure you pick the right people to help you out. And I think you'll be grateful for it in the long run as well. So hopefully that's been great help and some hints and tips for people there looking to get into property or look for buyer's agents. As usual, I'll let Melinda wrap it up and talk again next week. Thanks very much for listening, and bye for now.
Yes, thanks for joining us once again on the Brisbane Property Podcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode, certainly in providing some insights into different types of buyers agents that do exist in the market as our industry continues to evolve. As always, we would love for you to leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening to. Hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss future episodes. And as always, we look forward to speaking with you again next week. Thank you so much for your time, and bye for now.